Cool. All right. Next case up. This is a 2.5-year-old undiagnosed static myopathy. She's hypotonic, a little bit developmentally delayed. She achieved ambulation, I think, right around this time, 2 or 2.5. What does anybody want to do with this? Would any casting people want to chime in some thoughts on hypotonic kids? I always get the question, does this delay achieving ambulation? What does anybody have in their canned response for that question from families? Does casting delay achieving any motor milestones, particularly in a neuromuscular patient? Anybody? Bueller? Probably. You think probably?
How about by show of hands? How many people think that casting a neuromuscular kid is going to delay their motor development?
No. Or you do. So we got one. And everybody else thinks it's not going to, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. They're going to get there or not, but it doesn't have anything to do with the casting. Also, in this group, I think we use casting more as a delay tactic. So oftentimes I'll start with bracing. But despite bracing, the kid progressed to this level and then continued trying to kind of punt the ball a little bit. And then at age 6, I said it might be time to change gears. She does ambulate. So what do people want to do here? Knowing now kind of what we learned from the, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, in my mind, in neurofibromatosis, you have 2 types of scoliosis.
Yeah.
Dystrophic type
Yeah.
and non-dystrophic type. That would be the first step to see if
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is not NF. This is just a hypotonic neuromuscular, not neurofibromatosis. Yeah. Hypotonia. Yeah. No, not NF. Yeah. So yeah, I think based on what we heard, for an ambulatory patient, we're not going to go to the pelvis anymore. I still like rib fixation. And probably magnetic rods. The question here is that I wanted to get people's thoughts on are how do you handle the sagittal plane with magnetic rods? How do you choose levels and stuff like that? Do you just so what I did here is I tried to get the biggest actuator I could possibly get, and that sometimes informs my level selection so that I can get the bigger actuator instead of having one that has to be changed out after almost 2 years or less. I can get to 4 years. But then you can see what's going on here with the sagittal plane. This is a very long flat segment. So does anybody have any thoughts about when they use the shorter actuator in order to be able to have a little room to contour kyphosis or not? Does anybody have any, or is it a gestalt? In this kid, she was so flexible, I could probably, no matter what her starting kyphosis was, which in the sitting position she had a fair amount of kyphosis, I felt like I could get her flat enough to get a big actuator in.
How did you go to the ribs and not the spine? She doesn't have any she doesn't have any thoracic deformity. She doesn't have any respiratory issues.
Yeah, so the same reason, I think there's probably going to be a little bit of equipoise on that. Same reason we talked about, that Dr. Roy talked about. I think it prevents autofusion, leaves a little flexibility. I think in terms of risk of PJK, there's not a difference between the anchor selection, upper instrumented cluster selection. So yeah, we could go down that path and try and have that debate about screw versus rib anchors for a growing construct. Why do you like spine, Brian?
So on this, I'd go up to super transverse process hook at T2, try not to violate above, and then I put screws at 3 and 4. I can actually get better control of my kyphosis, I think. Then I'd stop at 4 or 3 like you did there. And you can still get the 90 in.
All right, Ron?
You can still go up higher a couple of levels here with
Yeah.
fixation as well. And I think that might be the key to this is trying to get at least to the upper end vertebrae of the kyphosis with the fixation, but it's fine based on your base.
Right.
Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, we've seen this movie, and this is the decision about the overstuffed magic. When you're putting a longer actuator in, you cannot match the proximal kyphotic contour. You
Yeah.
end up pulling back in order to get the magic in. So I've done this as well, and that I definitely more cognizant of this. So I think your PJK is fully because you took away cycle plane by necessity.
Right. So do you have a rule of thumb about how much length you want to leave that you can contour, or how much you try to match it, or?
I trace it, on the sagittal, and if I can't match the kyphosis, meaning I have sufficient rod proximal to my actuator, then I downsize the actuator. Because you don't have enough length of your rod there to match the kyphosis proximal.
Yeah.
I think one other thing you can consider when you're doing this is using the templates that they have, and you have the kid lying down prone. You can hold the template on a lateral X-ray and hold it there and kind of see what you're
That's a
able to
nice
get and help decide which rod you're going to use.
So you go with only passive correction is the only correction you want to get in the sagittal plane?
I think so. Maybe you can accept a little bit of additional correction, but I try not to get too much, and I try to really contour basically the way they're lying in the sagittal plane.
All right.
I think you have to get beyond above T. I think you have to get above T4 because you're sort of ending your construct sort of at the apex of the deformity. So I think you have to get above that.
Yeah, fair enough. Or certainly, because we left her with a hypokyphotic construct, she creates an apex as soon as she can. Yeah, so fast forward, she gets more and more kyphotic, but we keep lengthening her. She's not having any functional problems or neuro signs with this. Do we have to intervene, or when is PJK bad enough to intervene? Or do we just wait till she's fully grown and then deal with it with a final fusion? Have any thoughts on this? Is this bad enough that we want to take care of this and do an unplanned surgery? Any thoughts? It's been a slow, progressive thing. It hasn't been a sudden sort of.
How rigid is it?
Clinically, I felt like it was pretty flexible. When I lift her up a little bit and stuff, it straightens itself out. So, Paul?
I think the absolute problems with PJK are if it's risking PJF, which you're not since you're rib-based, so I don't think that's one difference there. You're not
Yeah.
risking PJF. Or if it's threatening the skin, or if it's causing pain. She doesn't seem to have any of those problems, so I would probably ride it out.
Yeah, so she went through all her lengthening until she got to the end of excursion, and now I'm going to change out her magic rods. Should I address the PJK at that time? Yeah, and change my anchor. So that's kind of been my plan also with the decision between rib versus spine. For kids that are young, 6 or so, I usually start with rib anchors and then switch them to the spine when they're ready for an exchange. And again, concerned about auto fusion and things like that. How about getting screws in a PJK case like this? That's not an easy thing to do with a kid this age and this size and that much kyphosis. Anybody want to put this kid in traction first? You want to take the magic rods out before you put her in traction? Do you want to, again, I felt like this was pretty flexible. So in my hands, I did intraoperative Gardner-Wells traction and some reverse Trendelenburg. And in terms of getting the screws in a kyphotic level, who has an O-arm? Does anybody have an O-arm and have some? Do you guys think you could use that to get some screws in here? I find the O-arm is usually pretty good, and then in kyphosis, though, not always. So I would say there's probably like an 80% chance we could have navigated some screws here, but sometimes it's so much kyphosis that when you start to tilt the gantry of the machine, it doesn't register well for navigating screws in the upper thoracic spine and kyphosis. Yeah, do you guys?
Also use templates, like a CT scan and use templates to produce
Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, so I do not consult for this company, but yeah, so that's where I think kyphosis and weird anatomy, this is where the patient-specific 3D guides are this is a great application of that. So I got a very limited CT scan of the area that I wanted to get some screws in. They printed out a life-size model. They also printed out level-specific, patient-specific guides. I used that to get my screw anchors into the spine, and then was able to get some nice screws there and deal with it there. But I could just be kicking the can down the line. Maybe I straightened it out too much at this point as well. Who knows? But I didn't really contour the rods or get any correction. I just used, other than the Gardner-Wells traction. So this was a week and a half ago I did this. Yes?
Who would think about performing a final fusion at that age? There are some papers out.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. 9.
9?
Yeah. If anybody wants to play with these models too, I'll just send these around. They click in like Legos.
What's her standard rating? Her trivagus was.
Yeah. looks really young to me, but yeah, I mean, anybody? All right, so.
Do you have any tips for telling how well they will continue to elongate when you're doing that magic exchange versus just being stiff at that point?
Oh, yeah, I mean, if I haven't had any clunking and stuff like that, I feel pretty confident about it. In terms of kids that have had a Vector or TGR that I might want to convert to it, I try to get a qualitative assessment on their last open lengthening, whether it goes easily or if I have to push pretty hard. But yeah, other than that, I don't have any great insight. So.
Probably have time for one more question. All right, we'll move on. Thank you to the speakers and the panel.